Okay, we are here with Joseph O'Connor. Welcome, all people that are looking at this recording. And we have the pleasure of sharing these moments, this conversation with the founder of ICC in 2001, the writer of many books of NLP, many really good books of NLP and coaching, and also one of the best coaches in the world. He has done a professional career during at least from 90. Well, you may see, when did you begin to do coaching? Because you, sorry, we may say that your first book was because you were a professional guitar teacher.
Yes, that's right.
And there was a transition there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for the introduction. That's very kind. I'm here in Australia at the moment, and it's very sunny in Australia, and so you may notice that I'm a little bit more glowing and red than I am usually, and that's because I caught the sun over the last few days. But that's very nice, because I do read that it's -2 degrees in England, so I'd rather be here. Yeah, well, as you know, and as some people may know, I was originally a classical guitarist, and I played and taught classical guitar, and I taught some very good players. So one thing that I learned very quickly, or two questions that came up for me always right from the start, was, how do you teach so that people learn, and how do you manage your emotional state when you have to perform? These are two very important questions for any teacher and performer. And even when I was a teenager, learning the guitar or learning anything, I always had half a mind for, how is this teacher teaching it? Is this working, you know? And I think, yeah, that worked for me, and that didn't work for him. And then teachers have different styles, but I was always interested in how teachers taught and what effect it had. So that was one question. That was one question I was always interested. Then there was the emotional state, and I used to teach very good guitarists, and I would bring them into the studio, and I would set them down and ask them to practice, play, while I went out to make some coffee or got us some water or something like that. And then I would listen at the door, and I would hear them play, and they would usually play beautifully. So then I would come in with the coffee or the water, and suddenly they wouldn't play beautifully anymore. They would make mistakes, they would fumble, they would apologize. And this really intrigued me, because nothing had changed except their mental models. Nothing had changed except their emotional state. I hadn't changed. I wasn't scary. I didn't think so anyway. So, you know, performance, emotional state dependent performance, and with something like musicians and performance artists, this is considerable. You know, you can have a lot of competence, but if you can't actually do it at the time when it's needed in the performance, then you're lost. You know, you haven't got a job. So it's just as important to manage that and to use it as to gain the skills. So I didn't call it coaching at the time, but that's, I think, what I was doing, struggling towards some kind of methodology that would help people learn in the best emotional state and perform in the best emotional state, and also for me to conduct myself in such a way that I would be able to help this particular person to learn in the best way that they learned, rather than in the way that I taught. So I was a bit of a chameleon.
So you just wanted to be your best version, for helping them to be their best version also.
I had a reputation, because I taught a lot in schools, guitar, as a very strange teacher, because with a lot of the children, they would come every week for their guitar lesson, and they would say, sorry, sir, I hadn't practiced. You know, and then I'd say, okay, well, you know, your parents are paying, and you want to learn, go practice. And very often they wouldn't practice. And so I would say, okay, well, I forbid you to practice. You mustn't practice this week, okay? And of course, then practicing became almost irresistible for them. So it's so much about emotion. It's so much about how things are framed, and kind of values, I guess, motivation, all of those things that then, when I learned about coaching, kind of came together in a particular methodology.
So it is like coaching fits with this, but you also have your own ideas about it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, when I'm trying to think, roundabout. See, I was teaching and playing guitar as a professional musician in the 90s, and in the 80s actually, and that's when I first came across NLP. Because I thought, I had a friend who'd done an NLP course, and he said, oh, this is really interesting, you should come and, you know, check it out. So I did, and I found it very, very useful. And at the time I was writing a book called Not Pulling Strings. That was my first book. That was published in 81, I think, 1981 originally. And it was a whole mishmash of different approaches, psychological approaches. And then I learned about NLP, and I started to put the NLP approach in, and it kind of took over the book. So the book ended up as NLP, applying NLP to the learning of music and an instrument. And in that sense, it was the first NLP book as such published outside the United States. And it was very interesting to write. It's still in print, and I still think it's quite good.
Yeah, I think so. So you get into NLP?
Yes, then I got into NLP, and I tested all the NLP ideas on my students. You know, I would ask them to play things and think things and watch where their eyes went, and practice them meta model and all sorts of stuff. Because I think it's really important that you don't take any of this on faith. You know, they're very interesting ideas, and they need to be demonstrated to work. And so in order to do that, you can't just believe them and then go about it. I think you have to test them. And the more you test them, the more you find out about them. And just like Bandler and Grinder, the founders of NLP, they would take an idea, a particular model, and they would test it to destruction until it didn't work anymore. So, you know, meta model, right, try it in every situation, every possible situation. And then, okay, it doesn't work here, right. So we found the limit, we found the edge. So representational systems, try it on everything. Okay, it doesn't work here, let's try something else. So you find the edges of your knowledge. And that's really important, because as long as you're inside your knowledge, it's kind of comfortable. You find the edges of your knowledge, that's where you can extend the map into something that's unknown.
Yeah, beyond the limits.
Yes, indeed, yeah.